Look for it, find it, make it your own. It's the Get Thrifty Podcast.
Hey Thrifties, welcome back to the Get Thrifty podcast brought to you by ARC Thrift Stores. ARC Thrift Stores is a nonprofit thrift store chain, and I am your host, Maggie Civic. We are all about sharing everything that has to do with shopping secondhand. So if you're part of our unique thrift culture, please contact us. We would love to promote your business, your social channels, and share your stories and advice with all of our listeners. As always, you know where to find us on Instagram and YouTube at ARC Thrift. Send us a DM and let's chat. Ladies and gentlemen, you know I like to research, but Emily is like my new obsession. Please welcome Emily Stochl. She is a circular fashion journalist and the founder of Pre-Loved, an independent multimedia platform dedicated to the world of vintage and secondhand fashion. She's been reporting on resale since before it was cool, and her podcast, can't wait to get more on this, is called Pre-Loved, the industry's first ever secondhand fashion show, has built a devoted following of vintage dealers, thrifters, collectors, and circular fashion founders who turn to Pre-Loved for stories they simply can't find anywhere else about resale as a culture. She writes a best-selling secondhand fashion newsletter on Substack, also called Pre-Loved, which is the highest ranked secondhand fashion newsletter on the platform. So you guys know I'm freaking out about this interview. Emily's reporting and perspective on the secondhand industry have appeared in Vogue Business, GQ, BBC, The BBC, Refinery 29, WWD, and Glamour, and she's spoken at the Global Fashion Agenda, the UN's Conscious Fashion Campaign, and the Sustainable Fashion Forum. We are delighted to welcome Emily to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
We are jazzed. I love your content, but let's start really simple. How do we find you on all the socials, follow and watch you erupt on the internet?
Absolutely. So my handle across all platforms is at Emily M. Stoeckel, EMILYMSTOCHL. And you can also just search Pre-Loved and you'll find the podcast, all the episodes over the years, as well as my newsletter. It's under the same name.
Easy peasy. Search Pre-Loved, guys. So simple. I want to start, I kind of want to back up because I know this is kind of a switch. You're used to interviewing people and really like boots on the ground in this industry in terms of like how vintage and secondhand is impacting current culture, which is amazing. But we want to know your history and how you got here. How did you find this space?
Yeah, so it feels like I have been doing this for so long now. Secondhand has been a part of my life since I was a teenager. I'm 35 years old, so I've been secondhand shopping at this point for about 20 years, which is wild to say. I grew up secondhand shopping like probably around the time that I would got my driver's license and babysitting money. I'm sure that's a common story that you hear. It's like an affordable way to find fun clothes. This would have been like the early to mid 2000s. And I didn't know a lot of people who were secondhand shopping at the time. But my high school best friend and I were both really into it. And it was like just like something that we would do for fun to be creative. And then I went to college. I got really into secondhand shopping and vintage shopping when I was in college. I would say that's when it became like the primary way that I shopped, like largely for the money aspect again, like the savings. I can remember buying like my first professional wardrobe pieces from thrift stores in college. My now husband and I met when we were in college, and he was really into thrifting, and we would like go to Goodwill's together on a Thursday night after class and just like wander around and find little trinkets. But it's so much more popularly accepted than it was even back then. Like at that time, like we were kind of like the quirky, arty kids who were secondhand shopping, but now it's just like so commonplace. Kind of everyone does it.
It's pretty exciting to see what's happened. And I want to get your thoughts on that. But before, so you grew up in Cedar Rapids, Idaho, or Iowa, correct?
I grew up in St. Louis, but I've been in
Okay.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's where I went to school. So I've been here for, gosh, since 2008. I've been here a long while now.
So you're into the Hawks then, correct? Am I
Oh,
correct in that?
yeah,
Okay.
you're correct.
Love
Yeah.
it. Yes. My best girlfriend, Lori Raymond, she's listening to this podcast right now going, yay! She's
Go
obsessed.
hot.
Yes. And
Yeah,
really
so,
excited about Caitlin.
Iowa is definitely like where I fell in love with vintage and secondhand. And I have to just say, like, to this day, I think the best vintage and secondhand is found in the Midwest, or at least like the
Wow.
middle of the country. It's little treasures that there aren't as many people still who are out shopping places like estate sales or the curated vintage shops out here. And you can find things that are just unbelievable. I found most of my very best vintage finds here in the Midwest. I have to give a shout out to Found
Yes.
Informed, which is my favorite vintage shop here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My now very dear friend, Gail Rawson, started this shop 10 years ago. And I walked in like on the first day and I was like, oh my gosh, Cedar Rapids has a vintage store now. This is so cool. And I started being Gail's occasional weekend shop girl. And you still find me behind the counter there every once in a while. And we have a lot of fun.
I love it. And I do hear that the Midwest really is just the stomping ground for excellent thrift. Have you been to Colorado yet?
Yeah, I have. I've done a lot of
Okay.
vintage shopping in Denver.
Yay.
Great vintage shops there. I've also done some vintage shopping in Colorado Springs.
Oh,
I
good.
feel like the West probably also has like a great vintage because like I've done vintage shopping in Montana, which I
Mhm.
thought was really good. So
Surprising
like,
gem.
yeah, you've probably got, I would say like the West and the Midwest, middle of the country. Like that's where it's at
Yeah.
for sure.
Totally agree. Now, some people would argue that East Coast has some pretty amazing stuff too. I mean, and it's so great that it's becoming so big that people are bragging about their vintage and secondhand in their states, which I'm loving that trend. And you kind of mentioned that things have kind of evolved and it wasn't so cool. What do you think? As an expert in this field, what happened?
Yeah. What's so funny is like I've told this story a bunch of times, but when I was in college was when that like thrift shop song by Macklemore came out.
Yes.
And so many people would like send that to me. They'd be like, "Oh, this is
Tell
so
me who this
you."
is.
And it's funny because it's like at that time, like I was probably the person that they knew that was obsessed with secondhand shopping, but like now just everybody does it. It's just so much more commonplace. It's changed so much. I would say like a big part of my journey was when I was coming out of school in 2013. There was a fast fashion industry crisis, the Rana Plaza factory collapse. It's actually coming up on the anniversary of that factory disaster here in April. And it was led to the death of thousands of garment workers producing fast fashion. And that was really a big eye-opening moment for me in terms of just how big fast fashion was becoming. That was kind of happening in the background when I was a teenager. And I'm glad, like, I never really got sucked up into the fast fashion world because I was already so into thrifting by the time that became so popular. But, like, that, happening and hearing about that and, like, connecting that story to maybe a deeper meaning of why I like to
Mm,
secondhand shop,
yes.
that happened for me kind of right as I was coming out of school, and it was very easy for me to then make secondhand first a priority going forward.
Which is so interesting. You actually have a great post with this quote that I absolutely love. It may actually be part of your teaser. I made vintage shopping my whole personality and then my career. Tell
Yeah.
us how it happened. Walk us through.
Yes. So like I was very into the world of secondhand and there just started to become more and more layers of why it had meaning for me. Like at first it was because it was just a fun thing to do as a teenager. And then it sort of started to have this ethical sustainability meaning behind it for me. And then I started to like connect to the local vintage shops and really think that those people were just some of the coolest people that I had ever met and had fascinating stories. And I guess taking a step back, so I went to school for writing. I've always loved writing and journalism. And I kind of realized around that time in the 20 teens that there wasn't a media ecosystem. Like I wouldn't have known that word back then, but there weren't like indie news platforms, podcasts, news channels talking about vintage and secondhand. And there were those things, or there were starting to become those things for like other niche interests and industries. Like, for example, I also really love books. I'm a big reader. And like you see, at the time it would have been blogs, but like blogs and podcasts and stuff like that cropping up around those interests. And I was like, why doesn't this exist for the thing that I love most, which is vintage and secondhand? So I decided I was going to start a podcast about it and talk to all of these really interesting folks that I was meeting who were doing this work. So I launched Free Love Podcast in 2018. I have been doing it ever since. It's grown in every way imaginable since then. I do the weekly podcast interviews, but like you mentioned, I also write. So that's always been like my first love, I would say. So I write for my newsletter. I write freelance for outlets who are becoming more and more interested in covering the world of secondhand. I've written pieces for magazines about it. And then of course, like the world of social media is also a huge component of that too. And that's allowed me to take like pieces of what I'm creating with the podcast and my writing and bring them to even wider audiences online.
It's phenomenal. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, the research you do, I mean, this is a full-time job. You are like doing the Lord's work, finding the background and the nostalgia of all these items. I mean, is this like all day, every day? Can you ever turn it off?
It is my full-time job, and it is, like, something that I think about just absolutely all the time. Um, it's funny, like, so my husband is also a small business owner. He runs a bakery and a cafe. So we both, like, kind of have these, like,
Best of both
jobs.
worlds. Yeah.
Yeah, these jobs that are, like, our world and that we think about all the time, and we just got back from vacation. We were just in New Orleans for the last week, and, like,
Which
it
we
was, like,
got to talk about. Yes.
bakeries, vintage shops, like, that was, like, what we did, and it's just what we love. So, no, it doesn't ever turn off, but, like, is that still kinda really fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And doesn't it just say something that you can do these things in this world today as a result partially of being so influential online? And I love that. You can have this great life where you live out loud and we get to go along with you. I felt like I was visiting New Orleans going through your content. It was great.
Aw, that's so fun to hear.
I've got to ask you, one of my favorite segments that you do is this whole feature on current celebrities and their vintage fashion trends. And it's really telling this story of how, all of these pieces that are coming back again, they're really affecting the modern consumer, which is
Mm.
really in turn helping people like me in this thrift industry. I bonus on the fact that I get more people into the store. Tell us a little more about that and that segment and why you do it, because it really does resonate, I think, with your viewer.
Yeah. So, like, jumping ahead in the story of Pre-Loved, it's like, so when I started this, I was like, okay, there's not really this space to talk about vintage and secondhand. And when I look back on that, it seems kind of funny because it's like, it's so big now and it's so influential in all parts of the culture. Like, vintage is happening in pop culture. There's business innovation happening in the resale world. There's just so many aspects of mainstream culture that have a vintage story. And I think part of what like propelled that into the mainstream was all of these celebrity moments. So you have to first give shout out to Zendaya and La Roche. They were some of the first like celebrity and celebrity stylist duos that were really focusing on wearing cool vintage archival pieces. Law used to be a vintage seller himself, and so that has always been important to him. And they started to make that something that they were doing to storytell. They would bring out these vintage archival pieces to tell a story about, a certain moment in time or history or the movie that she was going to be in and promoting. And we've seen that so much more over the years, other celebrities who are doing that and
Thing.
making it a part of their red carpet run. And I love telling the stories because it's like it's a fun, it's a very fashiony moment. Like these pieces that they're pulling are so, so cool.
Come on.
They have all the access in the world to be able to like find the coolest of the cool. But then I get to tell like a little bit of the history of the piece and why it was relevant in the time that it was relevant, and maybe why they're making that reference now and why it's relevant again. So it's been a really fun series to do.
Yes, I loved, like, I'm a huge Harry Styles fan, and I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my god." I wasn't really into the first song on this new album, but now I'm like, "I don't care. I'm here for his vintage looks, and, like, stick it out, Maggie, and get behind it." It's fascinating. Do you ever run out of, well, it's probably a silly question. Do you ever run out of ideas? I feel like the sky's the limit, and more people care about secondhand.
So true. It's so true. It's like bigger than it ever has been before. And like I just see a secondhand story in everything that
Mhm.
I look at. Like, oh, that's a reference. That's something that was a vintage piece that's been reimagined, and I just constantly seeing new ways to tell that story.
So your podcast, Pre-Loved, you get these really incredible guests. I've got to ask this little insider piece of information. Do you have like a whole team that helps you guest for this show? Because these are
No, it's
special.
it's just me. It's just
Wow,
me. Yeah.
incredible.
So it's just me, and it's always just been me, and I think that a lot of the ways that I've been able to connect with guests over the years is just like I'm very embedded in this space. So
Mhm.
like I go to vintage markets around the country and meet guests, people with interesting
In the
stories.
wild, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I go to there's a big, vintage and antique market called Brimfield out in Brimfield, Massachusetts.
Mhm.
I go out to Brimfield twice a year with vintage seller friends, and this is, like, the largest place where vintage sellers from all over the world come and convene, and I'm there the whole week, sometimes camping in the fields, just, like, in that world, and that's so that I can meet people whose stories would be good for pre-loved.
Yeah. When you say all over the world, we talk to people, lots of Canadians,
Mm,
lots of New Zealanders. I'm dying. I keep hearing about the Tokyo vintage markets. Can you
yeah.
share any of those fun international stories that have really like spoken to you?
Yeah, definitely. The Tokyo vintage market is really something else. Basically, like if you think about what we think of as being very collectible vintage today, this was like all kind of started by Japanese
Mm,
vintage dealers. So if you're familiar with the Rose Bowl market in Los
yeah.
Angeles, that's been going on for forever. And some of the biggest buyers of that market over the years were Japanese vintage sellers who would come to LA and they would buy Americana vintage Levi's, all these American heritage brands. And
Mhm.
that vintage became really popular in Japan before it ever really became really popular here in the US. And so to this day, when you go to big markets like that, like the Brimfields, like the Rose Bowls, you do see buyers coming from all over the world to come and buy vintage, and now it's cool because like it does seem like there's even a little bit more of an exchange happening. Like there's US buyers who go to Japan to then buy vintage there. I know also like US buyers who love to go to Paris and bring back European designer vintage that sells really well in New York, so it's become this very like global exchange world of vintage, which is super cool.
Yeah. I think more and more people that are really into luxury brands are discovering vintage.
Yeah.
I- what's happened? Tell us, what do you think? It's so fascinating to me that before, you had people that were like obsessed with these really, iconic brands, but they only would buy them new. Now they kind of have a different perspective. What changed?
Yeah, I think this has really happened. This has like ramped up so much since the pandemic, particularly
Mm,
because luxury brands have the price of new luxury items has increased so much since the pandemic. The price of Chanel bags, for example, increases like once, if not twice per year, new bags. Whereas if you look at the price of the vintage bag, you are able to get not only a deal, but you're able to get a bag that was made with 24 karat gold plated hardware as opposed to the way that they're made now. Hand stitched themes, just like really quality construction. And so I think people are smart. They're understanding that the bags that are being made today, not just Chanel, but just across luxury, like the bags that are being made today are getting more and more expensive, and yet they don't match up to what you would be able to get on the vintage market.
Mhm.
And so these shoppers who are luxury shoppers are now turning to vintage outlets to be able to source their dream bag. And they're looking to the archives when they come up with what is their list of their dream bag.
It's fascinating. One of your series, you were talking about how, these Hermes bags like hold their value like
Mhm.
better than
Like
Toyota.
stocks. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Educate us about that a little bit.
And it's a little bit of girl math, right? But like they say that Chanel and Hermes in particular, the price of that bag, that vintage bag, if you look back historically over the years, like what that value of that bag is, it actually is appreciating in value at higher percentage than the buying an index fund. So not
Here
financial
for that.
advice from me here at
Yes.
Relove, but there is real value in these pieces and they're only getting more valuable with time.
It really is like you're covering the economy of it all in one cool podcast. But your Instagram page in particular, I was just like, this is like the news everyone needs, because you really do talk about every aspect. We're talking about the economy, we're talking about savings, we're talking about good investments. It's pretty interesting. And then to bring it all back, like you say, in much of your content, it's so rad. It comes back, everything comes back to vintage. It's pretty
Yeah,
spectacular.
it does.
Another piece I had to ask you about, and you're way too young to be using the word rad, but I'm here for it and excited that you brought it back. Good on you. But you do cover some of the fun 80s style, in particular, this 1980s zebra shoulder brooch.
Oh
Oh
yeah,
my
that went
Lanta.
so viral, right? Oh my gosh, crazy.
I can't with that. I think my mother had something like that, Southern California, our house looked like Miami Vice in the 80s. And these were huge. Can you tell us about this particular piece for those who may not be aware?
Yeah, so this is a piece that wonderful vintage dealer named Carla showed me at the Manhattan Vintage Show earlier
God, you
this year.
remember her name. I'm so impressed.
Love Carla, shout out Carla. And, I'll ask people, like, show me something that you think people have not seen before, And she was like, what about this shoulder brooch? Because we've definitely seen people styling brooches, vintage
Mhm.
brooches have become a big thing. Even if you think about red carpets, like, you'll see men wearing tuxedos full of
And our
brooches
boy
on the red
Harry.
carpet.
Yes.
Yeah, Harry, Coleman Domingo wears a lot of brooches. So brooches have become really big again, which is, surprises some people who saw them come around the first time. And she was like, what about this shoulder brooch? And it's basically a brooch that you pin and it's curved on the bottom. So it sits nicely on the shoulder. And people just like resonated with that piece so much. They were like, well, I want it. Where can we buy? I mean, it got bought like right away. So
Mhm.
it's one of one, such as the world of vintage. But then other people were saying things like, I remember this, or my mom had something like this. And I think vintage can really do that for people. It clicks a memory of something that's, deep down in the recesses. It brings it back. And that was fun to see people connect with that so much.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those, like you said, one of one, but I feel like they're coming back. I can't wait to find one in the wild at one of my stores. I'm on
Yes.
the hunt now, which is, part of the beauty of this world is being on the hunt. And on that same note, I've got to ask, because we get a ton of these, the vintage fur comeback.
Yeah.
Thoughts? What happened? I definitely saw more of it in the NFL, the WAGs, all of the wives
Yeah.
and girlfriends.
Yeah.
What happened? Tell us, what's the history?
Okay, so this is my perspective on it. So obviously, like vintage furs, I can remember at our shop here in Iowa when we would get people coming in wanting to sell mom or grandma's stuff to us, there would usually be like a vintage fur in that woman's collection just because like every woman in the 50s and 60s, had those dress up pieces. And honestly, for many years, we would pass on them just because we didn't see the younger generations buying those pieces. And they're really heavy and intensive to store. And so we'd pass on those pieces. And I know other vintage dealers have told me that too. And then I would say, like, a year or 2 ago, we started to see vintage fur definitely, like, in those pop culture moments, like you mentioned, like the WAGs or, like, wives of celebrities. There was, like, that mob wife
Mhm.
trend that
Yep.
kinda went viral on TikTok. And of course, like by this point in time, people have opened their eyes to the horrors of newly produced fur. So if they're interested in that look, they're going to go out and look for something vintage. And there are still so many vintage fur pieces that exist in the world
Oh, yeah.
today.
Oh, yeah.
And so people were able to like go out and find them. Like you can usually find them at a thrift store, an antique store, or a vintage shop, and like just interest boomed. And I saw it a little bit 2 years ago. Like I feel like that's when I started to see like the early adopters start to really be interested in the vintage fur. And I was asking dealers about it then, and they were like, I don't know, I'm nervous because like what if I start buying up vintage furs and then it's a passing trend and people are interested in it? But then this winter, I was back out in New York doing coverage at shows. And I don't know if it was just because it was so brutally cold on the East Coast this winter, like it blizzarded like never before,
Mm.
but everyone was buying and selling vintage furs. Like I went to the Manhattan Vintage Show, like I mentioned, and just that was what was selling. That was what people were trying on. That was what was selling that day. Went to another vintage show called Part Two, Luxury Vintage Market, and they had almost a whole basement full of vintage fur coats. They're beautiful. And I think it's really personally, like I would never wear new fur, of course, but I think it's really great to see these pieces being reused and to see people be excited about them. And yeah, I wonder, like, how much further the trend can boom. I mean, I guess it has to now come out to, like, the Midwest and the rest of the country, right? It probably won't get to places where it's warm, but, like, here in the Midwest, obviously, it's very cold, like, are people gonna be really into wearing vintage fur coats next winter? I'll be super interested to
Yeah.
see.
We're excited here in Colorado because we too passed on those kinds of
Yeah.
things. We would hide them, but we would save them for
Right.
our Halloween. We
Yep.
are a very unique thrift store model where we save for
Sure.
certain holidays and certain seasons. You can't find a winter coat during summer here, and we didn't have a winter this year. So a lot of the fur that we're finding that gets donated now is going into our Halloween department.
Yeah.
And we're kind of known for that, our Halloween stock. When we bring our back stock of Halloween out, it's huge, but I just know that it's gonna be hot this year. It's gonna be the top thing that people are asking for. I'm super excited to see what happens because I know we saved it because we were too scared
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
ramifications to put it on our floors.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know, and I feel like that has been the vibe in the culture for like, when I was telling my mom that I was seeing this all over New York, she's like, "What do you mean? Like, they're just, like, walking around not afraid people are gonna throw
Like
red
throw
paint on
paint.
them?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's been the culture for a while now, but I think we're seeing it shift, and I do think that it's gonna come out of the big cities and
Mhm.
people are gonna be more interested
Yeah.
in that, and I hope, of course, that they look to vintage because the pieces are just, again, like the luxury pieces, just so high
Oh
quality,
my gosh, yeah.
that already exist.
And they're actually warm. They serve a
Yeah.
functional purpose as well.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see what happens here. We're so in tune to whatever the season is, and we had no winter in Colorado this year. Like one snow
So
day. It
weird.
was very odd.
So weird.
We're a little nervous about it, but you never know. Like anything can happen next year. So we're looking for that blizzard to bring back some of those fashions because it really does. It causes us problems at our thrift stores. I'd love to get your take if you ever want to do a tour of our warehouse, and like I know you care
Be so
deeply about
fun.
how things are recycled, how thrift stores are doing it, if they're being ethically responsible and how they're doing that. So it's a fascinating world, and open door. We'd love to have you at some point.
I'd love to come.
I do want to ask about a couple of guests on your podcast. Specifically, I'm obsessed with this red light vintage store out of Washington and the history of this gal. Tell us more. The barn filled with fit. Give us the story because it's just incredible.
Such a fun story. Okay, so listeners, go check out the episode of Pre-Love podcast that I did with Tacey Webb of Red Light Vintage. So she opened an iconic vintage store in Seattle in the 90s. And this was like the, Kurt Cobain era of Seattle, like
Yeah.
all of the cool grunge rock stars running through this thrift store or this vintage store. And she ultimately sold her vintage store and, went on to do other things in the world of vintage and fashion over the years. But she is now buying back Red Light Vintage in Seattle and is going to run it with her daughter. So the person who bought it from her all those years ago is retiring. So she had the opportunity to come back in and buy her vintage store and for her and her daughter to take it over and bring Red Light into a new era. And it's a fascinating story. She's such a great storyteller. It's a really fun way to look at like how this vintage world has changed and grown, right? Like her story of being like an arty kid in Seattle in the 90s and like what that world was like, and then just like how much she's seen the world of vintage change since then. So yeah, please go listen to that episode. I think it's so fun.
And bringing her daughter along for the ride for a
Yeah,
legacy. I
right?
mean, generational. I love a
Super cool.
generational badass women that are
Yeah.
doing amazing things in this vintage world is going to keep it going for years and years to come. So it gives me hope. Oh, the conservative archive of vintage labels. I need to ask you about this. The conservatory archive of vintage labels. So one of the things we do at ARC is, I've got my merchandiser. This is the second podcast that I've called out her age. She's 78. She's been with us for years. And
Icon.
she's so amazing. So absolutely iconic. She was an original Macy's buyer in the 60s. She has a great story. I'm never able to talk her into coming on the podcast, but she actually creates this database of labels for our pricers to kind of help us. The way we
Yeah.
price is like good, better, best, which is unusual.
Yep.
We really try and help our pricers be educated about what they're looking at. And then we don't like price it immediately. It's about being good, better, or best. And she categorizes these labels, but vintage has become so much more important for us to recognize some of those different things. So the Conservatory Archive, seems like I'm going to have to connect Gerda, shout out Gerda Thompson, to get her to, really look at this. This is a free service. Talk about this because I think it's really a fascinating, great resource.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that. So many thrift stores that are sorting merchandise, they have a binder with labels, and help people quickly be able to recognize brands. But the world of vintage, it's so hard because there's so many brands over the years. And how do you know and how do you learn to recognize these labels? And so this was an archive. It's called Fashion Conservatory and it was started to digitize vintage labels. There's 4,400 brands in there and nearly
Wow.
85,000 garment images. And I did an interview on my newsletter with Melinda, who started this archive. She's a vintage dealer herself, has been a vintage dealer for years and was realizing that there was no like professionalized place where you could go to look up these garment tag images and understand more about the brand history. And so she's built out this really incredible resource that is free. You can look up Fashion Conservatory. I think you have to put in like an email address to access it, just like you would do if you were accessing like a library archive or something like that. But then you can look up brands and you can look up the garment tags over the years. And what's really cool is that they include the tag with a picture of the garment that it came out of. So whether that's something that's come from her archive or an image that someone has submitted to them over the years. So you can not only see the tag, but you can also see the garment that it belonged to.
Wow.
Really great resource. And they work with a professional archivist on there. So everything is professionally researched and cited. Incredible tool for vintage sellers, for researchers, even. So definitely go check that out.
Yeah. I mean, I really was fascinated with that. I can't wait to dive into it. So more to come on that. Again, you're providing these resources to our industry. It blows my mind, all of your content and how much research goes into this. I literally, ladies and gentlemen, before I started this show, showed her the inside of my jacket. She knew exactly who this was. So
Yeah.
it's
You should look
really,
up the label in the
I
archive. It'd be
can't
cool
wait
for you to
to.
see. Yeah,
Yes.
that would be so fun.
And I did do a chat GPT search about the wool because there's this really funky thing about the All American wool label, which I hadn't
Yeah.
understood before. So fascinating.
Yeah.
And you're like self taught in all of this, which is even more fascinating. How
Yeah,
did
I mean,
you?
everybody in vintage is honestly like, I mean, maybe there's gonna be like schools for this down the line. I don't know.
Oh, maybe you need to be an adjunct professor. You never know.
Maybe. I mean, it's interesting. I've talked to people who work in like authentication at some of the big resale platforms, and they're like, this is all self-taught. Like everybody is, but maybe that is going to become more of a
Mm,
professionalized, maybe the industry will. I don't know, but everybody I know, everybody I've talked to over the years, they will say like vintage is something that you learn from being in the space, from handling thousands of garments, from touching the pieces, from looking at the label. And it's something that you learn from the advice and the knowledge of the people around you,
around it. Yeah.
the people who share the stories, the other sellers who share the stories.
Mhm.
So it really is that kind of like learn as you go type of feel.
Yeah.
But there's always something to learn, which is so interesting about it.
Mm. It does keep it very interesting. Any fears about this trend going away?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's only gotten bigger and bigger. I don't even think it's like realistic to call secondhand a trend anymore. It's just
Mhm.
how it's integrated into how people are shopping.
Which gives me hope for the future.
Yeah, it should.
So a few years ago, you spoke at the UN Conscious Fashion Campaign. Talk to us about this. As I've said on this podcast, I'm obsessed. I was in Model UN in high school. It was like my life's work, and have some real regrets about not continuing that path.
Mhm.
But now so many people are talking about fast fashion and being conscious about our footprint and sustainability. Can you talk about that experience and how it made you feel to be a part of something so enormous?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that now younger people are coming into the world of secondhand, having learned things about the harms of fast fashion. Like I said, for me, it was something that I learned about after I was already very deep into this world. But it's so important because not only is choosing secondhand just like a more interesting and fun and creative way to participate with fashion, but it's also a more ethical and sustainable way to participate with fashion. And so I was really excited to be able to share stories and education with the next generation about why that's important. Fashion advocacy still remains really important to me. And I think that it's a crucial part of this story of why we love secondhand.
It's very cool. I love it. You also wanted to talk about a very important day to you, this Vintage Store Day coming up right around the corner. We'll make sure that this episode airs before that so we can really get people out there enjoying this. Give us the history. Tell us all about May 16th, 2026.
Yeah, mark your calendars. So, May 16th, Saturday, May 16th is Vintage Store Day this year. And this is a celebration of independent brick and mortar vintage shops and the small business owners who run them and curate their vintage shops full of pre loved treasures. And think like Record Store Day or Indie Bookstore Day. This is an opportunity to get out there and celebrate the stores or pillars of their local communities, to hop around to a bunch of different cherished vintage spots and think about how they make your town or your city a better and cooler, more fun place to be. And this event was started last year by a couple of incredible Chicago based vintage store owners, and nearly 1,000 shops across the country participated. There was coast to coast participation in Vintage Store Day year one. So we're really excited to see what's to come for Vintage Store Day this year. You can check out itsvintagestoreday.com to see like participating shops in your area, or if you have a brick and mortar vintage shop and you want to get involved, you can sign up to be a participating shop. But I hope everyone gets really excited about celebrating all things vintage this May 16th.
I love it. This is so special to us. National Thrift Shop Day as well is like
Yeah,
really
exactly.
important.
These like big holidays.
Yes, where people and the media is picking them up and they're talking about them. So I'm excited to see this hit some national news for you guys, especially if you've gotten people all over the country. We have a few here in Colorado that have been on this podcast. Shout out the Modern Vintage down in Highlands Ranch. I'll reach out to them and make sure they reach out to you guys to get involved. I think that this is like an exciting opportunity for young people to really discover their local vintage shop too and not be fearful of them. My teenager and his little friends, slowly finding their way to these shops. And it's such a vibe of like, grab your local coffee, stay for a few hours, get to know people. And it's a little bit rock and roll. It's just they find whatever they're into. And it's just a really meaningful way to connect with the community. So I appreciate what you're doing in terms of your service to our community. It's blowing my mind how much research you put into all of this. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and exactly like you said, like grab a fun little drink, grab a friend, hop around to the vintage shops. It's like all of these other kind of experiential holidays, like Small Business Saturday. You'll see shops doing fun in-store pop-ups and activities or offering sales or offering special merch or stickers that go along for Vintage Store Day. So it's really just a great opportunity to like get together with people in your community and celebrate why you love vintage.
All these pieces have a story. I just
Yeah.
love it. There was a couple other things that you read the entire thread up report and report on it. Thank you for that. Super
Yeah.
grateful. Any highlights that we should be aware of for 2026 from that report?
Just, I mean, again, like I think that this big headline story there is that secondhand is beyond a trend. It's growing faster than new retail
Thank
by
you.
like nearly 4 times was the stat this year. So, I mean, I think we are kind of beyond that point of thinking that this is a trend that's going to pass. It's going to become the main way that people are
The norm.
participating in fashion, I think. Yeah.
Can't wait. Off topic, but still on. Devil Wears Prada 2. Thoughts,
I'm
feelings?
excited.
You know,
I'm so
I have her
excited.
vibe. I'm gonna be honest. Oh, Anne Hathaway. Have you ever been told that?
I will take that as the utmost compliment. I'm so excited. Obviously, like I grew up on Devil Wears Prada 1, especially as like a girl who wanted to work in journalism in the early 2000s, right?
Fashion. And they're gonna have vintage
Exactly.
looks.
Yes, and the incredible costume team that works on that movie, I've gotten to have some like little peeks into their archive
Tell
in the
us.
past. So you should go check them out. So one of the people that's working on this is Danny Santiago. He worked on the original movie, but he also worked with Patricia Field on the Sex and the City movies and that show, and just like that. Is a vintage seller and a vintage lover, and like has an incredible archive. Sometimes they will do live shows from their archive and they will show pieces that have appeared, on Sex and the City over the years, pull pieces out from their archive. So they are working on the second movie. And I just know that because of that, we're going to see some fab vintage. So I'm
Yes.
really excited to see it.
This is going to be exciting. I just love that mainstream has embraced this and,
Yeah.
made it cool. So it does give us all hope for the future. Can you share with us a unicorn item, like one of the coolest things you've ever found? Like, do you have that one piece? It's like,
Yeah, I have a late 70s, early 80s
mm,
Gucci bag that I
ooh,
found
yep.
for a real steal years ago that I absolutely love. I like love pieces that have a story attached to them. So the things that mean the most to me are often like not about the designer label or it being like a really covetable find, but just like the pieces that I'll never get rid of because it's got a great story attached to it or a cool person that I bought it from or that I bought it from a trip. I've got a budding collection of like vintage Coach bags from the 90s that I love. Some passed down to me from family or family friends, and then others that I tracked down myself because I just like love the quality of vintage leather Coach.
I love that. Okay, so you're definitely into the accessories, which I love.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wear them in your content. So if anyone what about the thing you want to put out into the universe? What are you looking for the thrift gods
Ooh,
to provide?
this is a great question. So I'm about to head out to a couple of really fun vintage shows. I love vintage shopping in
Mm.
person. I'm about to head out to the Twin Cities True Vintage Show in Minneapolis.
Ooh,
Pickwick Vintage is coming to Chicago. Like one of the best parts of my job is going around to these different vintage hubs and seeing what people are wearing and buying and how they're styling it. And then I'm also gearing up for the big trip out to Brimfield in May. So it's been so long since September. That was the last show. So I'm so excited to go out there in May and sell and source and find stories all weekend. And like, I don't know what it's going to bring me. And I think that's the fun, like I don't have something specific in mind that I'm like, oh, I'm hoping I'm going to find that there. But I know that the best of the best stuff will be there. So I'm
yeah.
really excited to see
It
what
will find
treasures speak
you.
to me.
Yeah,
Mhm,
the piece
mhm.
will find you. You said something interesting that did spark one more question here. The brick and mortar versus online buying. I couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons we don't sell online, which is, people are like, why don't, we get so much volume here. Our thrift stores, we have 40
Yeah,
stores, we'll have 50 by in the next 2 years. And so far our policy is we won't sell online. We won't do that because we think people want to touch and feel, and the Gerda Thompsons of our company really believe in that, touching and feeling the item being part of the experience of a cool thrift store. What are your thoughts on these online sales and the changes that are coming with it?
I mean, I think that it definitely has been a part of the story of why secondhand has become so mainstream, because it's been able to make secondhand shopping
Oh
an
yeah.
experience that, like, mirrors something what people are familiar with,
Mhm.
like being able to go out online and find what they're looking for. I think it's mostly personal preference, but yeah, me personally, because I am like such a sentimental person, I do just really love to find things in person and to have that memory associated with it too. That's a big
To
part of it
find,
for me.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm,
and the
mhm.
story from that seller or whatnot
Yeah,
that you're
that's
finding
a
in the
big part of
wild.
it
This
for
is
me.
I love it. It's making my day here. Anybody, well, before that, what's next for you? Is there anything on the horizon besides these big shows that are coming up? What can we expect?
Yeah. These big shows, follow along for Brimfield coverage. That's like, my Super Bowl every year. So
Awesome.
that'll be coming up before we know it. And Vintage Store Day. May is going to be huge. The
Ugh,
Met Gala will be coming up in May. There's always great vintage there. Yeah, so much fun to come.
exciting. Can't watch. Tell people how they find you again on socials. I needed to say it 3 times. I'm going to get 3 in. How do they find you?
Amazing. So you can find me at Emily M. Stoeckel across socials or search Pre-Loved. You can find Pre-Loved Podcast or my Substack newsletter, which is called Pre-Loved, anywhere across the internet.
Easy peasy. And I always like to say that this podcast is devoted to normalizing secondhand, but you are like literally a pioneer in the media for this industry. So I cannot wait to watch what you do next. You're doing the Lord's work. Thank you for your service to our industry. We're so grateful.
Aw, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
And as we end every pod, love to do a shout out to my personal inspiration, one Miss Dolly, Rebecca Parton. Thoughts, feelings about Dolly?
I love your little collection that you have back
You.
here. These are all like vintage finds
Oh
that
my
you,
gosh. Yes, they're either
yeah, all
sent
of
to
your
me.
fabulous Dolly
Yes,
things.
the stores are good to me. All of my stores send me Dolly stuff, and now we
Ugh,
get stuff sent to the podcast. Like,
that's
I
so
found this
fun.
postcard. It's so amazing. So we love her. She's an
I mean, what an
inspiration.
incredible icon. I would love has there ever been a museum exhibition of Dolly Parton's
Oh,
fashion? Like, I would love to see something like that. Wouldn't that be
amazing.
so cool?
And I think Dollywood really probably does a really good job of like archiving her early stuff. I don't know. I'm going this year, so I will report back.
Yeah, I have to imagine she does. Or like maybe because like Miley Cyrus is her goddaughter, right?
Mhm.
And Miley loves vintage. So
Oh,
I feel like someone is gotta be archiving all of that incredible stuff.
100%. It
Yeah.
really, and I mean, what an estate. Can you only imagine? I can't even imagine. She's been through every single era of everything and changed accordingly and done something iconic costume wise in every single era, which is amazing.
Yeah. I would love to see a retrospective.
Yes.
I'll put
Oh,
that out into the universe.
yes.
Let's have that.
Please, please. That'd be amazing. And she needs it this year. We got to pump her up. I hear
Yeah.
she's still sad about losing her husband. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, Emily, you're an absolute delight. Thanks for playing along and for giving us your time today. We love what you're up to. One more just for good measure. How do people find you on social so they can reach out, follow, and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And come find me at Emily M. Stoeckel across social media and pre-loved anywhere across the internet.
Easy peasy. Thanks, Emily. Appreciate it. And
Yay.
Thrifties, thanks so much for tuning in once again to the Get Thrifty podcast. Reminder, save our pod and leave a 5-star review about how funny, creative, and smart we are. And if you're part of this unique thrift culture, you know how to find me. I am at Podcast with Maggie on Instagram. And as always, please follow ARC on Instagram and YouTube at ARC Thrift, and now on TikTok at ARC Thrift Stores. Thanks so much and have a wonderful week.
Hunt for it, find it, make it your own. It's the Get Thrifty Podcast.